Most people think intelligence wins arguments. It doesn't. Intelligence wins silence. Because the moment you try to convince a blind mind, you step into a battle you were never meant to win. Intelligent people understand that not every mind deserves access to their reasoning, because reasoning is not just information. It is energy. Every time you explain your thoughts, defend your decisions, or justify your perspective, you are investing mental focus, emotional stability, and time. Most people assume communication automatically leads to understanding, but psychology shows something different. Understanding only happens when both people are willing to think, question themselves, and temporarily loosen their attachment to being right. When that willingness is missing, explanation becomes wasteful rather than productive. A blind mind does not reject logic because it cannot understand it. It rejects logic because accepting it would threaten identity. Human beings build their sense of self around beliefs, opinions, and past experiences. When new reasoning challenges those beliefs, the brain interprets it as a personal attack rather than useful information. Instead of analyzing the idea, the person instinctively protects their ego. This triggers defensiveness, interruption, emotional reactions, or complete dismissal. At that moment, the conversation is no longer about truth. It becomes about psychological survival. Intelligent individuals recognize this shift quickly. They notice when a discussion stops being curious and starts becoming emotional resistance. Rather than pushing harder, they step back. This is not arrogance or superiority. It is awareness of diminishing returns. Continuing to explain in such moments does not increase clarity. It increases tension. The more you try to prove your point, the more the other person feels pressured to resist, creating a cycle where both sides become more rigid. Over-explaining is often misunderstood as patience or kindness, but psychologically it can signal insecurity. When someone repeatedly justifies themselves, it communicates a hidden need for validation. Others subconsciously sense this and may challenge even more, not because they seek truth, but because they feel the emotional leverage. Intelligent people avoid this trap by understanding that confidence does not require constant clarification. They share their perspective once, clearly and calmly, and then observe the response. If the listener shows openness, the conversation continues. If not, they withdraw their effort without hostility. This selective communication protects mental clarity. Attention is limited, and where you place it shapes your emotional state. Engaging deeply with people who refuse to understand drains cognitive resources that could be used for creativity, planning, or growth. Intelligent individuals treat attention like a valuable asset rather than an unlimited supply. They choose conversations that expand thinking instead of those that trap them in repetitive defense. Another reason intelligent people limit access to their reasoning is that explanation cannot replace readiness. Insight only works when the listener has reached a point where they want to see differently. Trying to force awareness before that moment creates resistance. It is similar to teaching someone who refuses to learn. Effort increases while results remain unchanged. Recognizing readiness requires emotional intelligence, noticing curiosity, listening behavior, and openness rather than simply assuming everyone wants truth. This approach also maintains personal authority. People who speak less but with intention are perceived as more confident and grounded. When someone does not rush to defend every criticism, it signals internal certainty. Silence in the face of unnecessary argument often communicates stronger conviction than endless justification. Intelligent people understand that persuasion is not achieved through volume or repetition, but through timing and selectivity. By choosing carefully who receives their reasoning, intelligent individuals preserve emotional balance and prevent unnecessary conflict. They understand that wisdom includes knowing when communication serves growth and when it only feeds ego battles, allowing them to move through social interactions with calm control and strategic awareness instead of constant exhaustion and reaction. Intelligent people protect their inner peace because they understand that emotional stability is not a personality trait, but a strategic advantage. Most conflicts are not dangerous because of what is said, but because of how they affect your internal state. When someone provokes anger, frustration, or defensiveness, they are no longer just communicating with you. They are influencing your nervous system. The moment your emotions become reactive, your ability to think clearly decreases. Decisions become impulsive, words become careless, and control quietly shifts away from you. Psychologically, human brains are wired to respond faster to emotional threats than to logical reasoning. This survival mechanism once protected humans from physical danger, but in modern social interactions, it often creates unnecessary conflict. A harsh comment, criticism, or disrespectful tone can trigger the same internal alarm as real danger. Heart rate rises, muscles tense, and the mind searches for ways to defend status or dignity. Blind minds rely heavily on this reaction because emotional chaos levels the playing field. When both people become emotional, intelligence loses its advantage. Intelligent individuals recognize this pattern and refuse to participate emotionally unless necessary. They understand that not every reaction deserves expression. Remaining calm does not mean suppressing feelings. It means choosing when and how those feelings are expressed. Emotional discipline allows them to observe situations rather than be consumed by them. Instead of reacting instantly, they create a small psychological distance between stimulus and response. Inside that pause exists control. People who provoke others often seek emotional confirmation. They want visible frustration, anger, or defensiveness because reactions validate their influence. When you react strongly, you unknowingly reward the behavior. The other person learns that they can control your mood simply by pushing certain buttons. Intelligent people break this cycle by denying emotional rewards. Calm responses, neutral expressions, or strategic silence remove the incentive for continued provocation. Without emotional payoff, many conflicts lose momentum naturally. Protecting inner peace also preserves cognitive clarity. Strong emotions narrow perception, causing individuals to focus only on immediate threats rather than long-term consequences. Intelligent people think beyond the moment. They ask themselves whether responding emotionally will improve the situation tomorrow, next week, or next year. Often the answer is no. By prioritizing long-term stability over short-term emotional release, they maintain psychological authority over their own behavior. Another important aspect is emotional boundaries. Many people absorb the moods and negativity of those around them without realizing it. Complaints, anger, pessimism, and drama spread easily through social environments because emotions are contagious. Intelligent individuals become selective about what emotional energy they allow into their mental space. They listen without internalizing, observe without adopting, and empathize without losing balance. This separation prevents external chaos from becoming internal turmoil. Calmness also changes social perception. People instinctively associate emotional control with confidence and competence. When someone remains composed under pressure, others interpret it as strength. Even opponents become less aggressive because emotional reactions often fuel escalation. A steady presence creates psychological asymmetry. One person operates from clarity, while the other operates from impulse. Protecting inner peace requires self-awareness. Intelligent people regularly monitor their emotional triggers and recognize patterns that disturb their balance. Instead of blaming others entirely, they examine why certain words or behaviors affect them strongly. This self-observation reduces vulnerability because understanding your triggers weakens their power. Over time, emotional resilience grows, allowing challenges to pass without deeply disturbing the mind. By treating emotional calm as something valuable rather than automatic, intelligent individuals maintain independence from manipulation, conserve mental energy for meaningful goals, and navigate difficult interactions with deliberate control instead of unconscious reaction, ensuring that their emotional state remains self-directed rather than externally controlled. Intelligent people choose distance over domination because they understand that winning against the wrong people is still a loss. Many individuals believe power comes from changing others, proving superiority, or forcing recognition. But psychological maturity reveals a different truth. Influence has limits, and attempting to control every environment drains more energy than it creates value. Instead of trying to dominate difficult minds or hostile spaces, intelligent individuals strategically reposition themselves where growth and understanding are naturally possible. Human behavior is deeply shaped by environment. The The people you interact with regularly influence your thinking patterns, emotional reactions, and even your level of ambition. When surrounded by constant negativity, stubbornness, or intellectual resistance, the brain slowly adapts to survival mode rather than expansion. Conversations become repetitive, defensive, and emotionally heavy. Intelligent people notice when an environment repeatedly produces frustration instead of progress. Rather than fighting endlessly to change it, they adjust their proximity to it. Distance is often misunderstood as avoidance or weakness, but psychologically, it is an act of self-preservation. Every interaction requires cognitive and emotional resources. When those resources are spent on arguments that never evolve or relationships that resist mutual respect, mental fatigue accumulates. Over time, this fatigue reduces creativity, patience, and clarity. Intelligent individuals recognize early signs of this drain and reduce exposure before exhaustion becomes normal. Domination attempts usually fail because people resist forced change. When someone feels pressured to adopt new ideas or behaviors, their autonomy feels threatened. This triggers resistance even if the idea itself is reasonable. Intelligent people understand that transformation must be voluntary. Instead of pushing harder, they step back and allow others the freedom to remain as they are. This acceptance removes unnecessary conflict while preserving personal peace. Choosing distance also allows emotional objectivity. When constantly immersed in conflict, perspective narrows and reactions become personal. Physical or psychological space restores clarity. With distance, situations can be evaluated without emotional noise. Patterns become visible, intentions clearer, and decisions more rational. Intelligent people use distance as a tool for reflection rather than punishment. Another key reason intelligent individuals prioritize distance is opportunity cost. Time and energy invested in unproductive relationships cannot be invested elsewhere. Every hour spent trying to convince resistant individuals is an hour not spent building skills, creating opportunities, or forming supportive connections. Intelligent people think in terms of long-term returns. They allocate attention toward environments where effort leads to improvement rather than stagnation. Distance does not always mean cutting people off completely. Often it means reducing emotional investment, limiting sensitive discussions, or redefining expectations. Intelligent individuals may remain polite and respectful while no longer seeking deep validation or intellectual engagement from certain people. This balanced detachment prevents unnecessary hostility while protecting mental stability. Solitude becomes an important component of this principle. Many fear being alone because they associate solitude with rejection or loneliness. Intelligent people view it differently. Solitude provides space for independent thinking, free from constant social pressure. Without competing voices, ideas develop more clearly and self-awareness deepens. This strengthens internal confidence, making external approval less necessary. Interestingly, choosing distance often increases respect. When someone stops chasing approval or arguing endlessly, others perceive independence and strength. Scarcity of attention makes presence more valuable. People become more curious and less confrontational because the dynamic of emotional dependency disappears. By choosing environments and relationships carefully, intelligent individuals ensure that their mental energy supports growth instead of conflict, allowing them to move forward steadily, while others remain trapped in cycles of proving, persuading, and resisting change. Intelligent people rely on questions instead of confrontation because they understand that the human mind resists direct correction but responds naturally to self-discovery. When someone is confronted with statements like, "You are wrong," or "That makes no sense," the brain interprets these words as a threat to identity rather than an invitation to think. Psychological defenses activate immediately. The person stops listening, prepares counter-arguments, and focuses on protecting their position. At that moment, communication breaks down, not because truth is absent, but because ego has taken control. Questions work differently because they bypass this defensive mechanism. A question does not directly attack belief, it invites reflection. Instead of forcing a conclusion, it creates space for the other person to examine their own thinking. This subtle shift changes the emotional tone of the interaction. The mind moves from defense into exploration. Intelligent people understand that people trust ideas more when they feel they discovered them themselves, rather than when those ideas are imposed externally. This approach is rooted in a deep understanding of autonomy. Human beings have a strong psychological need to feel independent in their thinking. When someone feels controlled or intellectually dominated, resistance becomes automatic, even if the opposing idea is reasonable. Questions preserve autonomy. They allow individuals to maintain dignity while reconsidering assumptions. For example, asking, "What evidence supports that?" encourages analysis without accusation, while stating, "You have no evidence," creates confrontation and embarrassment. Questions also slow conversations down. Emotional arguments often escalate because both sides react quickly, speaking to win rather than to understand. Intelligent people use questions to introduce pauses. These pauses interrupt emotional momentum and force both participants to think more carefully. A well-placed question redirects intensity from emotional intensity toward logical examination. The conversation becomes calmer because thinking replaces reacting. Another advantage of questioning is information gathering. Before attempting influence, intelligent individuals seek understanding. They recognize that people's opinions are shaped by experiences, fears, and personal narratives that may not be immediately visible. Asking thoughtful questions reveals motivations behind beliefs. Once motivations are understood, responses become more precise and respectful. Without this understanding, confrontation often targets symptoms rather than causes. Questions also expose contradictions naturally. Instead of directly pointing out flaws, intelligent people allow inconsistencies to reveal themselves through dialogue. When someone answers a series of reflective questions, they may begin to notice gaps in their reasoning independently. This realization is powerful because it comes from internal awareness rather than external criticism. Self-realization rarely triggers defensiveness. Imposed correction almost always does. Emotionally, questioning communicates confidence. Someone who asks calm, deliberate questions appears composed and secure, while someone who aggressively argues appears emotionally invested in winning. This difference affects how others perceive authority. Calm curiosity signals intellectual strength because it shows patience and control. Intelligent people know that influence grows when others feel respected rather than defeated. This strategy also protects emotional energy. Confrontation requires sustained emotional engagement and often leads to escalation. Questions, however, distribute responsibility for thinking across both people. The intelligent person does not carry the entire burden of persuasion. If the other person refuses to reflect, the lack of engagement becomes obvious without conflict, making it easier to disengage peacefully. Over time, this method reshapes social dynamics. People become more open around individuals who question thoughtfully because conversations feel safe rather than competitive. Dialogue becomes collaborative instead of adversarial. Intelligent people are not trying to win arguments, they are guiding thinking processes. By leading others toward insight instead of forcing conclusions, they maintain influence while preserving harmony, allowing understanding to emerge through curiosity rather than resistance. Intelligent people focus on self-mastery instead of external victory because they understand that the greatest form of control is control over oneself. Most individuals measure success by how often they win arguments, prove others wrong, or gain validation from social interactions. However, external victories are unstable because they depend on other people's reactions, opinions, and emotions. When your sense of success relies on factors outside your control, your emotional state becomes fragile. Intelligent individuals shift their attention inward, recognizing that lasting power comes from mastering thoughts, emotions, and behavior rather than dominating others. Self-mastery begins with awareness. Intelligent people constantly observe their internal reactions during conversations and conflicts. Instead of asking, "How do I defeat this person?" they ask, "Why did this situation affect me?" This subtle change redirects energy from competition to understanding. Emotional triggers reveal hidden insecurities, expectations, or unresolved beliefs. By studying these reactions, intelligent individuals gradually reduce the power others have over them. The goal is not to eliminate emotion, but to understand it deeply enough that it no longer dictates behavior automatically. External victory often feeds ego, while self-mastery strengthens stability. Winning an argument may provide temporary satisfaction, but it rarely changes relationships or personal growth. In fact, proving someone wrong can create resentment, distance, or silent resistance. Intelligent people recognize that being right does not always produce positive outcomes. They prioritize maintaining clarity and composure over achieving momentary superiority. This approach allows them to leave conversations without emotional residue, such as regret, anger, or lingering frustration. Another aspect of self-mastery is emotional regulation. Human beings naturally seek validation and approval, but intelligent individuals learn to detach their self-worth from external acknowledgement. When praise or criticism loses the ability to strongly disturb emotional balance, decision-making becomes clearer. Actions are guided by principles rather than reactions. This independence creates psychological freedom, because behavior is no longer shaped by fear of judgment or desire for approval. Self-mastery also involves choosing responses deliberately. Most people react impulsively because emotions move faster than conscious thought. Intelligent individuals train themselves to pause before responding. This pause allows logic to evaluate consequences, tone, and intention. Over time, this habit transforms communication. Words become more precise, conflicts less frequent, and misunderstandings easier to manage. Others perceive this calm deliberation as confidence because responses appear intentional rather than emotional. Focusing inward also improves adaptability. External victory assumes fixed positions where one side must lose for the other to win. Self-mastery allows flexibility because identity is not tied rigidly to opinions. Intelligent people can change their minds without feeling humiliated because their self-worth is rooted in growth rather than correctness. This openness accelerates learning and prevents intellectual stagnation. Another important element is long-term thinking. External victories prioritize immediate satisfaction, while self-mastery considers future consequences. Intelligent individuals ask whether a reaction aligns with the person they want to become. They understand that habits formed in small interactions eventually shape character. Each calm response strengthens discipline, each impulsive reaction weakens it. Over time, consistent self-control builds a reputation for reliability and strength that no argument could achieve. Self-mastery also reduces unnecessary conflict. When internal stability increases, the need to prove oneself decreases. Conversations become less about defending identity and more about exchanging ideas. This creates healthier relationships because interactions are guided by understanding rather than competition. By investing energy into mastering their own perceptions, emotions, and choices, intelligent individuals create a form of power that cannot be taken away by disagreement, criticism, or misunderstanding, allowing them to move through complex social situations with steady confidence and independence rather than constant struggle for external validation. Remember, you cannot give sight to someone committed to blindness, but you can choose where to focus your vision, and that is the true power of the intelligent mind.